And welcome back to the workshop. In today's episode, we're going to be making up a brand new kind of material. You see, I'm working on my Jim Bowie project knife. That's this guy right here. You probably saw in the last episode me making up the blade for that guy. And here's the deal. I can't just throw any Joe Schmo regular old guard material on there. Because I'm the youngest and I think the least experienced knife maker on the project, I kind of want to add a little bit of pizzazz into it. And so that means that it's finally time to pursue an idea that I've had, no joke, for almost 6 years now. You see, when I was 17, I was trying to figure out some sort of fun material that I could play with, and I had some wrought iron at the time, and I just experimented around with forging it, and I noticed that it likes to split a lot. When you forge wrought iron, because it has a sort of grain structure to it, you forge down on it, and if you don't forge it hot enough, it'll split wide open. And I don't know exactly where it came from, but I had the idea of forging it down, a little bit cold, getting lots of splits, lots of checks in the material, and then filling it up with bronze. Now the idea is that would then give a kind of wood grain, granular structure. That could be the black iron, and then you could have the beautiful bright bronze in the in-between. Now I still think that it's a great idea. I've just somehow in the last 6 years never had the chance to pursue it until now. I've got wrought iron, I've got all kinds of bronze, both brazing rod and solid stock, and I think now's the time to do it. So with that, let's fire up the bandsaw. Oh, by the way, I have a new bandsaw and it's maybe the coolest thing ever. So with that, let's chop up a couple pieces of wrought iron and see what we can do. Now, really quick, I want to talk about two things. Something that's cool and something that's uncool. The cool thing is having a work-life balance that is super unhealthy. I love spending way too much time in the shop, not having time to do things like prepare meals, but you know what is cool? Is eating healthy. And those two things often don't go hand in hand. It's hard to have an unhealthy work-life balance and a healthy eating plan. But fortunately, I have a solution for you, and that is Factor. Factor is a fresh, never frozen meal preparation service that pairs your diet with chef-prepared meals that are shipped never frozen straight to your door. So what's cool is that despite the fact that I'm in the middle of the workday right now, and I really don't have time to run up to the house and make something that's gonna be good for me and fuel me well while I'm working in the shop, I can still have a delicious, protein-packed, nutritious, tasty, yummy, scrumptious meal in just 2 minutes. So I think it's super wonderful that I can have a delicious meal without any grocery trips, without any cleanup. This right here is a teriyaki chicken burger. It's got a good amount of protein, other fresh vegetables that are super tasty. Now Factor offers keto, calorie smart, chef's choice, vegan, veggie options. It means there's plant-based meal, there's seafood, there's meat, all that good stuff. And I like that you get such a tasty meal so quick and so easy. It really suits my lifestyle awfully well. So if you're interested in checking out Factor and getting some simple and delicious, wholesome, healthy meals, head to go.factor75.com/WillStelter130 and enter code WillStelter130 for $130 off across 6 boxes. I highly recommend it if you've got a busy lifestyle. Thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring today's episode. With that, let's jump back into wrought iron and brazing things. But before we do any cutting, allow me to introduce you to the newest member of the Will Stelter shop team. It is a Wells Model 1270 hydraulic bandsaw. Now this thing is the bee's knees. I am so excited. I just did a quick trip over to Washington and back to pick it up. I didn't do a video on it or anything like that. I just wanted to enjoy myself, have a good time picking up a machine, but this thing is seriously so cool. It weighs 2,100 pounds. It's hydraulic feed, which means that the way that you control it is with this hydraulic piston right here, and then you can control the cut speed with this lever right here that basically just controls a valve that allows to lower it at different speeds. It's a step pulley system for running different speeds on the actual blade itself. Not that I think that I'm gonna do that a whole lot, but this thing is just so cool. It's got a very good coolant system. Gets a lot of juice to the right places, and then it has these limiter switches on the back, which mean that when you don't want the blade to raise all 18 inches up, when it finishes a cut, it automatically raises because it hits the bottom limiter switch there. It's got a really cool stop system, which moves out of the way as it finishes its cut, and bam. Way cool. Also, whenever it does that, it stops the blade, turns off the coolant. The coolant only runs when the blade is running. This thing is just awesome. I got rid of the old bandsaw, sold it to another local bladesmith to make room for this guy. It has been painted slash restored a little bit, and I am super stoked to get to use it. I've only made one cut with it so far. I just got it into place last night, and it's time to do its first actual job of cutting on this wrought iron here. Well, it's time to take these 3 chunks, throw them into the forge, get it up to not nearly a suitable forging temperature for wrought iron, and get them split open. I wanted to do 3 pieces because I want to try out a couple different techniques. We'll probably get some interesting different splitting with each of the different techniques, and then we'll be able to try out different bronze infusion with each of the different pieces. All right, so we've got our 3 samples here. Now number 1 kind of fell apart. I forged on it a little bit too much. Number 2 also fell apart, but in a much more organized way that I think I'll be able to piece back together with my brazing. Number 3 also fell apart, but it's mainly just kind of one. It's like split up into 2 pieces. That one will be interesting. We'll get some interesting action, I think, with the bronze in the middle there. I'm gonna throw the most ruined one into the forge again, and just see what having it at red hot, touching it with the brazing rod will do. See if I need to add the torch onto it to get that bronze to melt, or if just the pure heat from the forge itself will allow that bronze to flow into the piece. The bronze is melting. Oh yeah. But is it cooling up inside? So there's our first wrought with bronze. Definitely got in there pretty good. Let's see if there's anything we can do to fill up that inside area there. Might be a little bit better. Okay, so test number 1 kind of worked. It definitely stuck it together, definitely flowed in there, but I don't think it was the best. I think we can do a lot better. So, because the next piece that I want to try is pretty well falling apart, my idea is to kind of stick it together with some baling wire, get that sucker really nice and hot, and then hit it with the oxyacetylene torch, get that bronze to flow in there really well, and I think that will be the ticket for getting good low porosity brazing. I assume the porosity comes from it cooling down and the air is trying to travel through where the liquid bronze is. The other thing about this piece is that the cracks go all the way through, and so hopefully that will help with it as well. Let's get this thing strung together, thrown back in the forge, let it come up to a nice hot heat, and then bring it out and try the brazing. So the first actual test piece, I let it reheat up next to the forge and it melted all the bronze out. So I think that having it split into multiple pieces is a bad idea. I cut another chunk of wrought, and I'm going to see if I can get this to come apart pretty good without being all the way apart, so I don't have to hold it together with baling wire. I just want some good deep checks and cracks in there. I think using the edge of the dies on the press is going to help split it open a little bit better too. So we'll just go ahead and give that a shot. Well, it looks good, but not quite good enough. There's still a lot of porosity in there. I think a big thing is that the split on it wasn't quite big enough. I think that split right there is about how big the smallest of the splits needs to be on the next one. All right, with that last failure, I think it's time to try switching things up. Maybe try a little bit different of a method. Now, you guys saw how fibrous, I guess, that material gets when you forge it cold. It really splits down the grain quite well. So I wonder if I could get it to split really good, like get a lot of splits going, like just a ton of splits, like maybe split up a couple bars, and then baling wire them together and throw them inside a crucible, maybe a tube of steel even, and melt a bunch of bronze in there. I think that would maybe give a little bit better flow in between the layers. It'd be a much higher bronze to wrought iron ratio than this would have been, but I think it'll still look cool, and I think we should give it a shot. Let's chop up a little bit of tubing, crush up some fibrous strands of wrought iron, and try concocting. I might have to melt bronze in here and then pour it in. I'm not quite sure how it's gonna work out yet, but we'll wing it. Pretty much empty. All right, so last night the microphone died conveniently as I spilled this crucible inside the forge. Now, fortunately, I was able to get it all out fairly easily, a little bit of chipping, but I did that late last night at about 10 o'clock. And now, this morning, I'm gonna go ahead and try again. I've got a lot of crusty stuff to pick out from the inside here, and then I've got some other scrap bronze to, I guess, chop up and throw in here instead. But with that, I'm gonna get the forge relit and start bandsawing up my pieces. Looking clean over here. Okay, we're doing it. We're pouring. Wow, that didn't even close to fill it up. So I just noticed down below some bronze starting to drip out, and so I don't know if somehow there's a drip or a leak in the bottom of this thing, but I took it out and put it next to the fire so it hopefully won't drip out anymore. I don't think that was hot enough. That sucks. Guess we'll see what we got. Shoot. Okay, so this is the setup to be able to water cast something. Basically, you pour liquid metal into a bucket full of water with a piece of cloth in there, and the liquid metal pools at the bottom of where the cloth sits, and then the water makes it so it doesn't burn up or destroy the rag in there. Never tried this before. I don't know if I'm doing it properly, but I'm gonna give it a shot. I don't think that worked. Burned right through the rag. Okay, I used the wrong kind of rag, I guess. Look at that. Look how protected it was. Wow, that looks so gross. Sculptural. Wow, that actually is super interesting. It looks like a giant, weird space turd or something. All right, I'm gonna cool off this guy just so I can get to cutting a little bit sooner. Feels solid, definitely very scaly, and it looks like it did eat a hole through the bottom of the can. It definitely had a little bit of water pour out of it, but not a whole lot. It gives me high hopes. Feels very hefty. Well, the first side looks pretty decent. This was the bottom side where all of that bronze went from the first pour, and that's the second side. It looks awful. There's no way to tell where it gets solid. There's still a couple little gaps in there, but I think that it's pretty fixable. So I think I'm gonna weld a piece of tubing on there and then cut it vertically. I just wanna cut a good old slice off, enough that I could maybe get a guard out of it if I needed to. I wanna see where it gets solid and where it starts getting really porous. Well, it doesn't take a materials scientist to figure out that this stuff is junk. Closest thing to what I actually wanted was this. It's got some nice activity, just some thin bronze running through it. I think that's closer to what I want. So I'm gonna take a couple more pieces of wrought, flatten them down, try to crack them just a little bit, slightly wider than what's there, and try that brazing technique again with a little bit wider crack, just to see if I can get it to work. But right now, things aren't looking too hopeful. Now, unfortunately, after all that milling work, there's not a whole lot of bronze left in the middle of that crack. But in the areas where there is bronze left, it's not full of porosity like it was before. I think that comes from me just hovering that torch a little bit farther away and just letting that stuff melt and stay molten for a good while and let those air bubbles come out. There is a little bit of porosity on this edge here, but I didn't really focus on that edge a whole lot. I kind of figured that if this stuff looked good, then I could go back in and refill that, but there's not a whole lot left in here. So it's time to move on to another chunk. Fortunately, I have another cracked up piece. Fortunately, I've got another piece that has about an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch wide crack running all the way through it. I don't know how it's gonna work, if the bronze is gonna wanna flow all the way through, or if I'm gonna have to flip it or what, but I'm gonna spend a lot of time getting that thing nice and hot and trying to fill up that whole thing full of bronze. I think that's going to be really nice. That way the top of the guard will be wrought, and then we can have a nice layer of bronze in the middle, and then the bottom can be wrought iron as well. I'm really liking how this is looking. I think it's solid. I think it's a good piece. I think this is it. Let's slap this sucker in the mill, face it off as lightly as we can. We're a little bit thin. We're at about 650 thousandths of an inch thickness wise. I don't want to go thinner than a 1/2 inch. That means that at a 1/2 inch, I can have it a nice taper to the center of the palm swell, and then have some good kind of Coke bottle shaping in my handle. But basically, talk about that later, I don't want this to go thinner than a 1/2 inch. So we've got 150 thousandths of an inch, or 2 meters if you use the metric system. Well, I torched it and ground it clean, and I still have porosity in there. I'm wondering, and I think that it might be because I didn't have a preheat on that material. I don't know how deep of a heat I was able to get, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna throw this guy into my even heat treating oven and bring it up to 1700 degrees as a preheat. That's close to the melting point of this bronze, and hopefully then I can attack it again with the torch and really get in there and try and clean that stuff out. And if that doesn't work, then I'm gonna have to run down to the store and get more brazing rod, because I'm just about out. I used a full pack. I don't know what that is, like 2 pounds of bronze or something like that. No, a pound, probably a pound of bronze. And try to fill in another big cracked piece like this. This is turning out to be way harder than I thought it was gonna be. Now, I did put a piece of steel in there just in case the bronze does melt, then it'll hopefully stay on the steel and not on the brick floor. Okay, so it looks all right. Apparently, I got my melting temperature wrong. I had the oven set at 1700 degrees, and I guess the melting temperature was lower than that, because it definitely started to melt out the bottom of it. But let's grind in, see how it looks, especially on the top. If it's not perfect, I have an idea based off of this. I'm wondering if I could just grind clean and then tack weld or weld a plate onto the bottom and then fill it up with bronze. And that way everything could be completely liquid. I could be at my right temperature and maybe get through there without having any porosity. Okay, so we definitely have some porosity. This was the bottom side where the bronze was melting out at. It looks like it maybe hardened and then didn't refill. The porosity is very light. So I think I want to try this again with a good preheat on it, but I think I need to split open a new piece of wrought. And first, I need to run to the store and get more brazing rod. Actually, before I run down to pick up brazing rod, let me see if I can get the guard shape that I need out of this piece and see if we have a solid enough chunk for what I need to do. All right, so we got the guard cut out, and obviously there's a couple big porous spots in there. But I think with it cut down to the smaller size, it'd be a little bit easier to get those areas filled in and get the whole thing heated up. Hopefully, that or it's all gonna run out on the edges and it'll die. But if that's the case, then we'll try again. But if not, I wanna give this a shot and see what we can do as far as getting those big porous areas filled up. Okay, so the guard didn't work out, but I think I have my last idea of what I think might work, and if it doesn't work, then we're just gonna have to scrap this whole plan. What I wanna do is take a big old piece of wrought, split it, Nice split down the middle, just like that last one, and then seal up my ends and the bottom with MIG bead. Okay, so I figured that probably simply welding up one crack in the middle and the ends wouldn't do it because there's gaps that we need to get into in there. So I'm going to take it to the bandsaw, cut off the ends so the whole thing will fit very flat and square sideways in this guy, and then I can rip down the top of this, build a box around it basically, a little tray, I guess, that'll allow me to use less bronze overall to be able to fill up all of the internal cracks and whatnot in there. I think this is gonna work. Well, I added some walls onto the sides there, mainly because I don't want any bronze to spill out over the sides. So I'm gonna add a little bit more onto the top as well, just in case there's not enough bronze on there. Give that a shot. We'll throw it in the oven, let it sit for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes and see how we're looking. All right, I'm gonna take that plate out of it with the billet on top. Nice, looking good. Guys, I think this might have worked. It looks very liquidy, quite juicy. I think we've got a good billet of material in there. All right, so it looks really good except for the very large bubbles and pockets that we have in there. Kind of like that last piece. I'm gonna see if I can work around it, get a guard out of this area, and if not, then I think I might just have to use regular wrought iron for my guard material. Well, that's a huge bummer to have dug into, cut into another big air pocket like that. That pretty much makes this piece unusable for what I need to use it for. And unfortunately, I have a time constraint on this project, and I've already spent 3 days longer working on this material than I thought I was going to. I know it doesn't seem like that, but there's lots of heating up, cooling down, preparation time, stuff like that that goes into all this. And so I unfortunately don't have time to pursue this any further right now. I actually got some other material that I think might work a little bit better. It melts at 1200 degrees rather than 1700 degrees. And so I have a feeling that that might do a little bit better being able to flow without getting gas pockets trapped in there. I don't know. Hopefully I'll be able to pursue this idea again for a project down the line where I have a little bit more time to dive into rabbit holes. So I hate to have another video that's just experimentation and failure, but unfortunately that's what we have. We got close, but we just couldn't get that porosity out of there, which is a big deal to me. I want to have pure, solid bronze filling up my pockets. I'm a-okay having the deep checks in the wrought iron that just comes naturally from that material, but I want to have the bronze be a solid, pure looking vein running through the piece, and I just wasn't able to get that this time around. But I really appreciate you guys sticking around to the very end here. We're gonna have to call it there for today's episode, but stay tuned for the rest of the Jim Bowie project. I'll be finishing out my blade, doing my guard and handle, and I'm very excited about that whole process. I think this knife is gonna be absolutely killer looking. So thank you guys very much for the support. Go ahead, like and subscribe and comment. Let me know how I could be doing this better, because quite honestly, y'all might know better than me. I think maybe centrifugal casting might be a good way to do it to help get all the porosity and pores out of there, but it's a project for another video. With that, thank you patrons, thank you guys, thank you Factor for sponsoring today's episode, and thanks to the rest of you viewers for sticking around to the very end. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.